Hello everyone, thank you for taking time to look at our presentation today. We hope you find it of value all around the value, the total, the cost of ownership messages around HP 3PAR Flash. My name's Darren Edwards, and I'm just going to give you a short introduction to the MCSA group and our services. I'll then be handing over to Tom Robinson of HPE to do the actual presentation on the technologies and the TCO information for you. And once that's done, I'll then pop back at the end and briefly discuss a customer case study and how you can actually get engaged with us to actually run a TCO analysis for you. MCSA, we were formed as we brought together two companies, Main Deck Computer Solutions and CSA Waverley. We've got a lot of experience in delivering an end-to-end IT service and solution. We're specialists in your data center infrastructure, so looking after that critical set of systems that actually runs all your business operations. And we provide business critical support, so on-site services, managed services to support your entire environment. And we are privately owned and managed. So just to reiterate some of those things that we do, IT data center, high-end IC support, providing the break fix support stuff. We do consultancy, managed services. We're a solutions technology partner, so we're providing professional services to deliver things like Microsoft consultancy, VMware consultancy, backup, IT evaluation. We are a very, very focused HPE Gold partner, so all of our solutions are based around that whole portfolio that HPE can offer. So they're probably the only vendor in the IT entire landscape that can actually deliver a true end-to-end solution. And we do use some ecosystem software products from other resellers just to fill the gaps. One last point there is also we're a strategic supplier to the government and public sector through a number of frameworks. So on that note, I'm going to hand over to Tom now to talk you through the value of 3PAR. Thank you.
Fantastic. Thank you very much, Darren. So Tom Robinson, I work as part of the UK&I pre-sales team for Hewlett-Packard Enterprise. And unlike most IT presentations today, we're going to take it up a level. So I'm going to be talking about understanding the value of, from an economic perspective, why moving to an all-flash 3PAR deployment is going to be a good move for your business. Before we move on, I want to take it back to basics, however, and really look at how people have traditionally bought storage in the marketplace. So as you can see on the right hand side, traditionally the written data is the amount of data that you're actually being asked to store. So this is the committed zeros and ones into those disks. The allocated space, so this is what the end user is requesting, so the storage that you are provisioning to your hosts is key to customer satisfaction because customers will always be demanding more storage and they want it quicker, they want it to meet new performance needs, they want it to be highly available, and traditionally this is fairly difficult to do in a tiered solution because you have to look at making sure the right workloads are on the right tier. You've got to make sure your customers are happy, but you then also have to take into consideration costs, etc. And then what we have on the left hand side is the raw capacity. So this is the storage that you physically buy. It's the storage that you have to pay to cool, to power, to maintain, to support, to actually host in your data centers. And it's this raw capacity which is key to the TCO message moving forward. When we look at the efficiency of this traditional model, we've noticed in the marketplace that the amount of written data compared to the raw capacity is generally much lower. However, from a customer satisfaction perspective, customers don't want to take the risk of not being able to give their hosts storage, to carve out lumps of storage to their internal customers, because they don't want to upset them, they don't want to have applications run out of storage, etc. So they've traditionally always had a lot more raw capacity on the floor than they actually need, which has led to an increase in power costs, cooling costs, data center costs, etc. And it's being able to reduce this raw capacity, which we see as critical to reducing the total cost of ownership of your storage deployments. So what we decided to do in the marketplace is go and have a look at 200 traditionally deployed arrays in the market and really look at how the storage was being deployed. And it actually proved to be much more difficult than we thought, because whilst it's very easy to see how many volumes and the size of the volumes that have been carved out, how much data has actually been written to those volumes in traditional arrays is actually very difficult. It normally takes an application that actually scans the hosts to track exactly what zeros and ones are being written to the array. And to make sure that we were kind of not HP only, we looked at a various assortment of different arrays out there in the market, from the likes of HDS to EMC, some IBM arrays. We also looked at some of our HP EVA and XP install base, but also some of the NetApp FAS arrays out there as well. And what we saw in the marketplace is out of over 20 petabytes of raw storage capacity, less than 5 petabytes of that was actually being written to. Now, again, from an allocated perspective, less than 10 of that was actually being allocated to hosts. Now, we understand that there's going to be some overheads in terms of RAID, redundancy, hot spares, etc. But even then, we were really surprised at how much of that raw capacity, which, bear in mind, people are having to pay for in terms of cooling, power, and rack space, was kind of sat there idle, not really doing anything. So what we then decided to do is, well, let's normalize that for 100 terabytes of raw data. It's all well and good having kind of 20 petabytes, etc., but what does that actually mean? So 100 terabytes of raw capacity usually meant that about 45 terabytes of that was being allocated to hosts. But the strange thing there was, of that 45 terabytes, about 22 of it was actually being physically written to disk. So if you look at that 100 terabytes of raw, you're actually only using a fifth of it. However, you're having to pay for 100 terabytes worth of power, cooling, rack space, etc. Now, this is something that we said, okay, well, let's go and have a look at our 3PAR install base. So we have 30,000 arrays dialing home. So this is live data that we have to actually do this analysis against. It's not made up numbers. These are real customers running real workloads, etc. And what we found is that there were 4 types of deployment models that our customers in the market were deploying. We have those customers who are traditionally deploying their storage. So for the large majority of our customers, this was a large amount of raw capacity, a smaller amount of allocated capacity, and then a much smaller, usually around a fifth, of actual written data. What we then have is our top 10% of customers. We have an oversubscription model. So this is where we see a slightly reduced amount of raw capacity, and then what we're seeing is they are over allocating the provision storage to their hosts, knowing that through some of the thin technologies, so the likes of thin provisioning and our monitoring capabilities, that they're not going to run out of raw capacity. They have the comfort that they can over allocate how much storage they have. But even in that case, we were still seeing that the amount of written data compared to raw was much lower. Again, there was some gaps in terms of how much they would be paying in terms of power and cooling, etc. What we then did is we looked at the top 10% of our customers who were over allocating their storage and saw that the amount of raw to written was much better. So this really kind of, from a efficiency perspective, shows how much more efficient, even in a traditional type deployment, that 3PARs can be. Now, this is being safe in the knowledge that you've got the reporting capabilities to warn you if you are going to hit any kind of thresholds that you set, but still the amount of power and cooling you're having to pay for is much reduced. However, what we then saw, so we took the top 2%, and in an all-flash deployment model, we actually start to see that the written data to the array is actually greater than what the raw capacity on the floor. Now, you say that that's impossible. However, through technologies such as deduplication and our compaction technologies, we see that the amount of data that's being written can be much more because you're using pointers, etc., and you're actually deduplicating some of that data, that you don't need as much raw capacity. And then from an overallocation perspective, you can see that that bar is way up over, knowing that, again, from a reporting perspective, we have the capabilities to say, right, it's now time to go and buy more storage. But from a TCO standpoint, the amount of raw capacity you're paying for is much, much lower. So it all sounds great, but let's actually put some numbers to that and really see where the savings can be. So if we look at a traditional deployment model, we can see that based on Gartner's number for storing a raw terabyte per year, so this number incorporates the likes of support, procurement, power, cooling, and rack space, that number is about just over $2,000. So we can see that to store 52 terabytes of written data in the traditional model, we would have to take that Gartner number, so $2,009, and times it by 200 terabytes, which would be traditionally the amount of raw capacity a customer would need. So that gives us a number of just over $400,000. If a customer moves to an oversubscription model, so they're actually provisioning more storage to their users than they have raw capacity, we can see that actually the raw capacity required to store that 52 terabytes of data is about half, so just under half in terms of savings. Fantastic. And that's just moving from a traditional deployment into an oversubscription model. What we can then see is the top 10% of our customer base who are using our best practice oversubscription, that raw capacity has been dropped again to just over 50 terabytes. So compared to the 400 terabytes that we see, the $400,000 we see in a traditional model, we're now down at $142,000 per year to store that data. Again, that's about a third, just under half of what it would be traditionally. However, when we look at an all-flash deployment, we see that number drop to $78,000. So we're now at a fifth of the cost to store the same amount of data. We're still storing 52 terabytes of data, but at a fifth of the cost of deploying it in a traditional manner. So moving on, what does that all mean from an actual saving perspective? So if we look at the raw TCO savings, you're looking at about 320K. We understand that there's going to be a cost of change, so you're going to have to skill up your internal IT guys to make sure that they understand how to use it. You're going to have to kind of rip and replace. So the cost for new hardware, so we push that an all-flash array will cost around $1.5 per usable gigabyte. So to store that 52 terabytes of data is going to cost us about 80K. We then take into account a cost of change, which is normally seen around 1x the hardware cost, but because for some customers it's a huge shift, we're going to say that we'll be reserved and put 2x the cost of the hardware. So that's going to be around 160K. So if we then take into account the cost of the new hardware plus the cost of change, that's going to be around 240K. We then take the 320K we're saving from power and cooling and rack space, take away the 240K of the new hardware and the cost of change. That gives us a first year saving of around $80,000. So really, you can see that the array starts to pay for itself at the end of year one. And from there on, all you're going to see is pure savings compared to deploying a more traditional type environment. So as you can see, we're not focusing here on the speeds and feeds of performance. We all know Flash performs way over and above 10x, 20x, 50x the performance of spinning disk. But sometimes we kind of need to step back and look at the softer benefits and how much money we can actually save moving to an all-flash deployment. So why would you choose a 3PAR for your Flash infrastructure? So from an availability perspective, so we've got over 3.5 exabytes out there in the marketplace today who are dialing home. We know that we can give the 6 nines availability guarantee, etc. And we usually come out at around 10 to 15% more efficient than our competitors through a number of technologies that we have. From a cost perspective, due to, again, some of our thin technologies in adaptive sparing, we have much bigger disks than some of our competitors, which really mean we can see that our TCO is around a fifth of the traditional deployment. We then see from a performance perspective, so we all know that Flash performs over and above spinning disk. I've mentioned that previously, but also something that's frequently overlooked from a manageability perspective. You're only managing one tier of disk. Gone are the days of having to worry about making sure you have the right applications on the right tier. You have everything running on the fastest possible disk today. So when your application developers come to you and tell you they need faster storage, you can actually turn around to them and say, well, hang on, maybe you need to go and sort your application out to optimize it to run on Flash, because I'm giving you the latest and greatest of technologies today. And again, if you were to ask your application vendors and your internal customers if you could run your workloads on all Flash, would you? The answer is always going to be yes. Who wouldn't want to be running an application on Flash and the benefits that that brings? So very quickly looking at the 3PAR family, so we have a number of awards from an SPC benchmarks perspective. We have the fastest array out there in the market, but we have a very low cost of entry. So at the very bottom end in our 8200 family, you can deploy an all-flash world for about $19,000. And due to the technologies within 3PAR, so it's the one OS, it's the one management capability, no matter whether you're deploying the smallest 8200 or the largest 15 plus petabyte enterprise array, it's the same feature set. You're not restricted at any point of your life cycle. So all well and good talking about numbers, etc. But what are my key takeaways today? So the first takeaway to keep front of mind is how much written data do you actually have in your environment? So forget about how much raw capacity you have. How much of that data are you actually committing to disk? If this is something you don't know or aren't sure of how to find out, we can work from a HPE perspective with MCSA and yourselves to make sure that we can come and do an analysis for you to find out how much written data you have and start your all-flash journey. Also keep in mind that alongside the performance benefits, also the total cost of ownership, which having to go back to your business and the people who have the money essentially, deploying all flash is around a fifth of the cost of traditional storage. And you will continue to see the cost of flash drop. So we announced a few months ago that we have our 7 terabyte drives. We also have 15 terabyte drives in the market today. If you look at how flash technology is evolving, you will see that double, potentially even quadruple within the next year to 18 months. So the cost of flash is only going to continue to come down. Again, if you want to know any more information or you want a slightly deeper dive around the 3PAR technologies, please contact myself or anyone at MCSA, and we're more than happy to have that conversation with you. So with that, thank you for taking the time to listen to me, and I'm going to pass back to Darren to talk around a customer reference case.
Many thanks, Tom. So quickly, I just wanted to go over an experience that MCSA have had with one of our most long-standing customers. So it's a large NHS organisation, and as Tom showed, very, very traditional in the way that they deploy their storage solutions. Everything is thick provisioned. They allocate all their storage. They're using spinning disk, and it was a very, very inefficient way of doing things. They are now a 3PAR customer, still with spinning disk, but about a year or so ago, we started to deploy SSD flash for them because they had a larger IOP requirement initially. But some of the things that they've actually noticed since deploying the Flash and how it's actually helped those guys out is really all around these TCO messages that Tom's been talking about for the past few minutes. So they no longer capacity costs are really no longer of a real concern for them, because they're now starting to use thin efficiencies. They're using deduplication, they're over provisioning, they have less licensing costs because they don't need to buy so many disks anymore. And like I say, they really have moved to that model where they can actually see the benefits of SSD. We don't have to buy another 50 terabytes of spinning disk. We probably only have to buy 30 terabytes of flash to take that entire workload. Their data center costs are massively starting to reduce. They are in a hosted environment, and power, cooling, rack space, all of these things are now actually starting to lower for them. So they're seeing all of these benefits. Some other asides that they've actually seen as well is performance is no longer a problem for them. Whenever they come up for a specification for a new set of services, they no longer need to worry about having any kind of performance benchmark in there, because the 3-par system will just accommodate that workload. We've got some quality of service technology in the 3-par that means that we can guarantee an amount of IOPS or bandwidth to particular applications if we need to. And the last thing really is actually the top thing is, since adopting SSD flash drives, they have seen basically outages just do not happen anymore. Whereas if spinning disks fail, and they do fail, everyone knows they fail, you have a long rebuild cycle time. It just doesn't happen with SSDs. We do have some data that we can share with you outside of this presentation around the lifetime of SSDs, and being far in excess of actually the guaranteed 5-year warranty that HPE provide. So good customer experience. We've got lots of this happening now. All of our customer conversations now around 3-par and storage are around efficiencies, reducing that total cost of ownership for you. So how do you engage with us? MCSA will provide you an engineer on site to go through the analysis tool that HPE have provided to us. We can work with the HPE person as well. We'll discuss your storage needs and issues, run the assessment, capture information crucially about that amount of data, so the raw data, the amount of written data. We'll present that back into a report, which will show you those benefits of 3-par all flash, and actually clearly show to you that within a year, moving to a flash environment can really start to drive some economical savings for you. So on that note, I'd like to finish. We do have there is a question about, say, it was all about the engagement model. So if you do not have an MCSA account manager, then please reach out via the switchboard or through sales. If you are engaged with MCSA already, then please talk to your account manager, and they will get involved with the pre-sales team, and we can come and actually do this analysis for you. So thank you very much for your time and attention today.